that date is probably burned into your brain.
It was a pivotal moment, absolutely. That's the day the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles flipped a massive switch.
A huge switch. The rules for just getting on the road changed, overnight.
It was the shift to an English-only requirement for all driver's license testing.
Right.
That includes commercial driver's licenses or CDLs.
Right. No more Spanish options, no more Creole, just English.
Just English.
And of course, when a change that big happens, the conversation just explodes. You get the political arguments, the cultural arguments, all the shouting matches online. But we're not here for that.
No.
We're here to look at the document that actually tries to find the truth. I've got it right here. It's titled, Measuring Florida's English-Only Licensing Impacts on Road Safety.
Which is such an important document because it's not an opinion piece. It's a methodology paper. It's the experts saying, okay, the politics are over, the rule is in place. Now,
how do we prove if this works?
Exactly. How do we actually prove if this is making the roads safer or, more dangerous?
That is the core question, isn't it? Because you can't just vibe check road safety. You can't just say, oh, it feels safer. You need hard numbers.
You do.
But what I found so fascinating about this source material is that it argues we might be looking at the wrong numbers entirely. If you just look at total crashes, you miss the whole story.
You absolutely do. This report is basically an instruction manual. It lays out a mission, a very specific one, to track 3 distinct metrics that capture the full ripple effect of this policy.
And it's clever. It's not just looking for the good stuff.
No, that's the key. These metrics don't just look for the benefits, like, say, better sign reading. They explicitly look for the fallout.
The unintended consequences.
That's the phrase. In systems thinking, anytime you introduce a hard barrier,
Right.
you create a workaround. This report is designed to measure the safety cost of those workarounds.
Okay, let's dive into that. The first metric in the report is, it's arguably the darkest one. It deals with what happens when people fall out of the system entirely.
Right.
The report calls it crash rates involving unlicensed drivers.
This is where the rubber meets the road, literally and legally. So to understand this metric, you have to think about the economic reality for the driver.
Okay.
Before February 2026, if you were a limited English proficiency speaker, an LEP individual, you could take the test in your native language, get your license, get insurance, drive to work. You were inside the system.
You were trackable, you were tested, insured. But the report outlines this theory that I think it's critical. It suggests that just because the state stops giving tests in Spanish, people don't suddenly stop needing to get to their jobs.
Exactly. The demand for mobility doesn't just vanish. If a parent needs to pick up a sick kid from school or a construction worker needs to get to a job site at 6 a.m., are they really going to say, well, I failed the English vocab section, so I guess I'll just sit at home?
Especially in Florida, where public transit is.
Yeah.
Let's be generous and call it developing. No, they're going to drive.
And that is the unintended consequence theory. The fear is that this policy creates a ghost fleet. You might end up with thousands of drivers who are perfectly capable, but because they can't pass this new English barrier, they opt out of the licensure process entirely.
So they drive without a license, which means they drive without insurance, and crucially, they drive without ever having their vision checked or their basic road knowledge tested.
That's the paradox. By raising the standard to ensure safety, you might accidentally remove the only safety filter you had for that specific group of people.
You can't verify if they know what a stop sign means because they never even walk through the DMV doors to begin with.
Precisely.
So the metric is tracking crashes where at least one driver is unlicensed, suspended, or revoked.
Okay.
But this is where the methodology gets really technical, and I think we need to spend a second on this. The report says you cannot just count the crashes.
No, absolutely not. That is the oldest trick in the data book. If Florida's population grows by 2% next year, crashes will probably go up by 2%. That doesn't mean the policy failed.
It just means there are more cars on the road.
Right. So the source emphasizes this concept of normalization.
They want to look at unlicensed crash rates per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, or VMT.
VMT is the gold standard. It flattens the curve. It asks, for every single mile driven on a Florida highway, what's the probability of an unlicensed driver getting into a crash?
And if that specific rate spikes after February 2026?
Then you have a smoking gun. It tells you the policy didn't just fail to remove bad drivers, it actually created a whole new category of risk.
It stops the data from lying to you.
Right.
It isolates the variable. But it's a scary thought, right? Because if this metric goes up, it means the roads are just getting wilder no matter what the official statistics for licensed drivers say.
It creates a two-tiered system. You might have a safe official system and a chaotic shadow system operating on the very same asphalt.
Speaking of heavy risks, let's shift to the second area this report analyzes, because the stakes here feel completely different. We're not talking about a sedan going to work anymore.
No. We're talking about 80,000-pound commercial vehicles.
The commercial driver's license, the CDL changes. This is a huge part of the source material.
A massive part. And it's a detail I think a lot of people forget.
Which is that up until that date, you could take parts of the CDL exam in Spanish. There's a pathway for non-English speakers to become professional truckers.
And that pathway is now closed. So the report is looking at fatalities and serious injuries in commercial vehicle accidents as the key metric here.
So why isolate commercial vehicles?
Well, because of the complexity of the job, there are really two competing theories battling it out in this section of the report.
Okay, let's unpack them. Let's start with the safety first theory.
This is the argument that driving a semi isn't just about steering. It's about reading hazardous material manifests, understanding way station logs, reading complex bridge weight warnings.
And those are almost always in English.
Correct. The argument is that English fluency is a safety requirement, not just a bureaucratic one. If you can't read the label that says flammable gas, you are a rolling liability.
So, logically, if you mandate English testing, the overall safety of the commercial fleet should go up, but you're filtering for better communication.
That's the theory. It makes sense on paper.
But then you have the counterargument, which the source calls the workforce quality risk, and this one really stuck with me.
It's the brain drain scenario.
Exactly. Imagine a driver who's been on the road for 20 years, a perfect clean record, knows every curve of I-95, can back a trailer into a space the size of a shoebox, but his written English is shaky.
Under this new rule, that driver might be forced out of the industry.
And who replaces him?
That's the question. The trucking industry is already facing a massive labor shortage. If you purge thousands of experienced drivers because of a language test, you create a vacuum.
And vacuums get filled, usually by younger, less experienced drivers.
Or the remaining drivers have to work harder. Longer hours, tighter deadlines, more fatigue. The source warns that we might see commercial accident rates go up, not because drivers can't read English, but because the average experience level of the entire workforce has plummeted.
That is a fascinating trade-off. We might be trading language fluency for road fluency.
And the report says we need to watch the injury rate per commercial driver to see which one of those theories actually wins out.
It's a stress test for the entire supply chain. If we see an uptick in jackknife trucks, you have to ask, did we fire the safe drivers because they couldn't pass a grammar test?
It connects back to that core idea of what actually makes someone a safe driver.
Which brings us to the third metric. And I think this is the most intellectually honest part of the whole report.
I agree. This is the lie detector test.
The report calls it violations related to sign or rule misinterpretation.
It's a mouthful, but it is so crucial. If the entire public justification for this English-only policy is people are crashing because they can't read the signs,
then we should see a very specific type of crash disappear.
Exactly. We aren't talking about speeding. We aren't talking about drunk driving. We are talking about someone turning left on a big, clear, no left turn sign. We're talking about someone ignoring a bridge out warning.
The mechanism of the crash has to be a failure of comprehension.
Yes. This metric is fascinating because it tries to isolate language as the root cause. If the policy works as intended, the number of people driving the wrong way down one-way streets should, theoretically, drop to near zero among that population.
But, and this is a huge but that the source points out, measuring this seems incredibly difficult. I mean, how do you actually get this data? It's all based on police reports, right?
It relies entirely on the officer at the scene. And that introduces a very messy, very human element.
Right.
Imagine it's 2 a.m, it's raining, there's a fender bender. Does the officer really take the time to figure out that the driver misunderstood the sign? Or do they just write, failure to yield, and move on?
Or is there a bias? If the driver speaks with an accent, does the officer assume they didn't understand the sign when actually they were just looking at their phone?
That is a significant data vulnerability. The source fully acknowledges that distinguishing between bad driving and a language barrier is really, really hard. You could be perfectly fluent in English and still ignore a no U-turn sign just because you're impatient.
I feel personally attacked.
We've all done it. But that's a behavioral issue, not a linguistic one. This metric is trying to strip away all the behavioral stuff and just find the linguistic signal in the noise.
And the implication is just huge. If we look at the data in, say, 2027 or 2028, and we see that these sign misinterpretation accidents haven't really changed,
Then the whole premise of the law kind of collapses, doesn't it?
it would suggest the policy was built to solve a phantom problem. If people weren't crashing because of language barriers in the first place, then changing the language of the test was just a barrier for the sake of being a barrier.
That's right.
So we have these three distinct pillars, and this is where I want to synthesize this, because the way this report is outlined, it suggests a scenario that I find really challenging. These metrics might not agree with each other.
In fact, it's highly probable they will contradict each other. Real-world data is rarely that clean.
Okay, let's play out a scenario. Let's say metric 3 improves. We actually see fewer wrong-way crashes. The state holds a press conference. They celebrate, look, English-only testing worked. People are reading the signs.
A clear win for the proponents of the law.
But at the exact same time, metric 1, the unlicensed driver rate, it skyrockets. We have 20% more hit and runs because unlicensed drivers are fleeing scenes to avoid deportation or arrest.
So you have a safer official road system, perhaps, but a much more dangerous unofficial reality.
So how does a policymaker weigh that? How do you balance better sign comprehension on one hand?
Against more uninsured, untested drivers on the other.
That is the ultimate question of governance. And that's why this methodology deep dive is so vital. Most people just see the headline, Florida passes law. End of story.
But the story isn't the law. The story is the measurement.
It moves the conversation from ideology to observation. We're not guessing if the roads are safer. We're watching the dashboard.
And we have to be willing to accept what the dashboard tells us, even if it's uncomfortable. If the data shows that excluding people from the licensing system actually creates more danger than including them did, then you have to rethink the whole system.
Or, conversely, if the data shows commercial accidents plummet because every single driver can finally read all the safety regulations, you have to admit the policy had a valid point.
Precisely. It cuts both ways. That's the beauty of data. It doesn't care about your politics. It just counts the wrecks.
And that technical detail about VMT vehicle miles traveled, that is something I'm going to be looking for in every single report I read from now on. It's such a simple way to spot if someone is, manipulating the narrative.
Always look for the denominator. A number without context is just noise. If someone tells you crashes are up, you have to ask them, are crashes up per mile? It changes everything.
Always look for the denominator. That might be solid life advice, honestly.
It really is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the mechanics of Florida's road safety experiment, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought. We've talked about the friction between these metrics, but there's an ethical dimension here that the source logic sort of hints at.
The responsibility question?
Exactly. If the state creates a policy that knowingly pushes people into the shadows, into unlicensed, uninsured driving, does the state bear some responsibility for the accidents that happen in their shadows?
It's the difference between de jure safety, that's safety by law, and de facto safety in reality. If your law makes the paper look better, but the streets look worse, have you actually succeeded?
That is the question we'll be tracking as the data starts to roll in from the FLHSMV and the NHTSA over the next few years. It's going to be a long experiment.
And we'll be here to read the methodology when the results finally come out.
Absolutely. Until then, check your blind spots. Always look for the denominator.